Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to have so many of you joining this Zoom presentation this morning. It's a project that has basically taken about 5.5 months to do the in-depth research. And I'd like to do a special thanks to this list of people here. They had provided some very important information, some critical direction, references, both in terms of other people to speak to, as well as where I could find other resources. Many of these people on this list are actually former Chinese school classmates when I went to Chinese school, as well as other Chinese school students who went to Chinese school at other places than where I attended. And many of them had personal material that they had collected from their families as keepsake that probably can't find anywhere else. So I felt very fortunate to be able to have that material in order to put that along with personal stories and recollections into this incredible fact-finding mission. So I wanted to highlight a couple people that Irene Chang and Devin Chin Lee, who directed me towards Reverend Feng or Carl Feng's book, The Dragon Pilgrims, which is accounts for the history of the Chinese church in San Diego, which also overlaps with the Chinese schools. So it was a critical resource. And one of the other books written by historian Murray Lee, and that book was referred to me through Sally Wong Avery. And that is a book, if you haven't seen either of these two books, you should look into, but the book by Murray Lee is called In Search of Gold Mountain, okay? It's the history of, Chinese history of San Diego. So anyway, those are incredible resources as well as personal keepsakes that allowed me to put this together. So thank you very much to all of you. Next slide, please. This presentation is called Retracing the History of Chinese Schools in San Diego. And one of the interesting things about it is that when I was growing up and I went to Chinese school in Chinatown and the old mission church, I went every day for 5 days a week for 6 years straight, and there were no summer breaks. So that was a long time, considering that at the time that I went, I was age 6 to 12. So those 6 years during my time at Chinese school was half of my life. So it seemed like a huge time span. But in doing this research, I was able to gain a more interesting perspective because in this 150 years or so history of Chinese schools, my time in Chinese school accounts for probably less than 2% of the history. So that's how expansive this is. Next slide, please. Retracing the history of Chinese schools in San Diego. I'm going to take you through this timeline today with key marking points. The first one starting in 1870 and going all the way to the present. And I will make a highlight and remind you of some of the markers as we go through this presentation. Next slide. One of the ironies about the history, so-called, of Chinese schools in San Diego is that the first Chinese language schools actually were not in Chinese, they were in English. And that's how it all really started. In 1870, the first Presbyterian church on 8th Street and D Street, which is now Broadway, started the first Chinese mission in San Diego as part of their Sunday school program, which offered English classes for male Chinese immigrants who were pretty much all the Chinese that there were here. I'd say 95% of them, to learn English as well as the Christian teachings 2 nights a week. Now, to the missionaries, Americanizing the Chinese here was a way of preparing them to take the American culture and also the Christian faith back to China to evangelize, all the people in China. But to the Chinese, they were more than willing to become Christianized in order to learn English, which would help them adapt, find jobs, and get around here in the United States. On the left, we have a picture of the first Presbyterian church at 8th and Broadway. So next slide. So In the beginning, at the first mission school, there were only 7 students. And as the number grew, they would hire more instructors. So this is very intensive because they didn't understand English. So you almost had to have a one-to-one or pretty close to that ratio between teachers and students. So one of their first English teachers happened to be George W. Marston, who was a very wealthy member of the First Congregational Church and the founder of the Marston Department Store in San Diego. George Marston would later become a critical long life friend of the financial supporter of the Chinese Mission School and the Chinese Mission Congregational Church. We can see the store on the right. And George Marston was also a philanthropist. He lived till age 95. And most of his adult life, he was involved with the Chinese mission. Next slide. So that was back in the 1870s. 11 years later, in 1881, the American Baptist Church also successfully established a Chinese mission in San Diego. And one of the devoted, very devoted students was a gentleman named Ah Quinn. I don't know if you've heard of him, but everybody should know his name, okay? He actually grew up in China, and he studied English as a child at the American Missionary School in Canton. And he continued refining his English skills when he came to San Diego, both at the American Baptist Church mission, as well as the First Presbyterian Chinese mission in San Diego. And between these two missions, there were actually about 40 students, and the ratio was 25 to 30 teachers. So in 1884, Ah Quinn's oldest son was the first Chinese boy born in San Diego. And Ah Quinn's children would later become the only children at the early mission school. So on the right, we can see a portrait of his family, which was taken in 1889, but his family had 12 children. So Ah Quinn is famous for being the Chinese railroad labor contractor, as well as a wealthy businessman, and was noted as being the mayor of Chinatown, although he technically wasn't, but they had so much respect for him, they called him mayor. Next slide. As the number of Chinese laborers in San Diego grew during the 1880s, so did the number of Chinese missions. Between 1881 and 1883, about 800 Chinese laborers came to San Diego to work on the California Southern Railroad, which was going from National City outward to the east. The Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association also arranged for over 100 Chinese laborers from up north to come down and join the other work crews to construct the Hotel Del Coronado in 1887. And we can see those pictures on the left there. The Chinese families were also starting to move to San Diego because of the anti-Chinese riots in up north, Washington State, and Northern California. Next slide. But it wasn't until 1885 that Dr. William C. Pond would start the Congregational Chinese Mission School in San Diego. There was a Chinese man named Hong Li who convinced Dr. William C. Pond, the superintendent of Chinese work for the American Missionary Association in San Francisco, to start the Chinese school in San Diego, the Chinese Mission School. William Pond rented a house, a very small house on 631 First Avenue, again, happens to be from George Marston. And he started a Chinese mission school, and they offered a very aggressive program, free English classes 6 nights a week. And before long, all the Chinese were going there. Word really got around. So his Chinese mission school of the congregation of the Congregational Church was the best organized mission with the best mission program in San Diego. And so as his school evolved, 4 years later in 1889, Pond purchased a house with his own money, relocated the school to 639 13th Street, where there were as many as 50 students per class studying English and religion for free. In 1900, because of the number of people who were coming from Chinatown, he moved the school to 633 First Avenue on the edge of Chinatown to accommodate convenience for them. Now, the interesting thing about William C. Pond was he came from a missionary family. Both he and his father were heavily involved in the congregational missionary program. And he himself had founded more than 49 Chinese missions between 1874 and 1920, and converting an estimated 3,500 Chinese to Christianity, of which a large number of them actually went back to China to spread the word about Christianity. So one of the other interesting things about William Pond was while most of the missionaries were going to foreign countries and learning the language and then converting them, he had a strategy of teaching them English and then having them carry the message back home. So that was a unique strategy at the time. Next slide. So in 1907, Pond moved his mission school down the block, I'd say a few houses or something like that, to 663 from 663 First Avenue to 645 First Avenue. And it was a small one-story building with an 18-room dormitory building behind it, which allowed the school to rent out rooms to Chinese bachelors for $5 a month plus $2 a month for utilities. And this building also happened to be owned by George Marston. By 1907, all of the mission schools in San Diego had closed, and the Chinese mission school, the Congregational Chinese Mission School, absorbed all of their members. So it was really the place now, but it would still be 18 years before the mission school would offer its first Chinese language program. Next slide. Between 1907 and 1925, the number of Chinese families and American-born Chinese grew immensely. Young Chinese men who wanted to find a Chinese wife had to go to Los Angeles, San Francisco, or even to China. And also Chinese men who were born here in America were also going back to China to get married, to bring back their Chinese wives. So there was an incredible need for foreign brides to come to the mission and participate in activities that would help them learn the English language as well as adjust to the American way of life. And we see on the left is the front entryway to the Chinese mission school. And the managing director there at the time was a woman named Margaret Fanton, and that's her assistant, Agnes Lee, along with some of the kids that were attending there. Next slide. So finally, in 1925, okay, you got to remember, this journey started in 1870. This is 1925 now. Reverend C.C. Hung would start the mission's first Chinese language class. Next slide. Reverend C.C. Hung was not only the mission's first pastor, he was also the mission's first Chinese pastor. That meant a lot because in 1925, as the congregation grew, the members really felt they needed a Chinese pastor. So Reverend Ching Chong Hung was born in China. He came to San Diego through Hawaii as a part-time pastor while he was attending San Diego State College. And he was able to deliver both the sermons in both Chinese and English. Reverend Hung started an English night class on the weeknights and organized the first Chinese language class for children who were born here. His first Chinese class started with 30 students and met Monday through Saturday, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Next slide. But almost as quickly as he got his classes started, 2 years later, in July of 1927, the mission school was forced to move all of its church services and its classes to the CCBA building, that's the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association in Chinatown. The mission school had become so dilapidated, the building, it was raining, when it rained, it leaked and floors were creaking, plumbing was going bad. So the school turned to the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association as a temporary home. And while the old building was being torn down and a new mission was being built, the Chinese classes were held downstairs at the building. George Marston was then persuaded to donate the land that the old mission facility had occupied for the site of the new mission. And in November of that year, the new facility was completed, dedicated, and launched. The name of the school, mission school, was then changed to Chinese Mission. And then in Chinese, when they translated it, it became San Diego Chinese Congregational Church. If you ever see a picture of the front of facade of the mission church at that time, you'll notice it says in English on the top, and then the translation is, for a sign, it probably had 36 characters. So it was a complicated translation objective. So on the left, we have a picture of the CCA building, circa 1920s on Chinese National Day celebration, which is the Independence Day. And you can see it in its full fanfare with banners and lanterns and so forth. And on the right is a very interesting picture. The photographer was instructed to take a beauty shot, the most critical shot of the new mission building. And you notice he took this picture of the side of the building, not the front of the building. He cropped off half of the front. And the reason why was they were so proud of the fact that it had a 2-story dormitory building attached to the sanctuary. So we'll go to the next slide. So after C.C. Hung left in 1928, the Chinese mission would go through 4 ministers and 4 long years without Chinese language program. Next slide. By now, in the 1930s, the immigration laws were revised to allow some wives or some more wives of Chinese citizens to come to the United States. It basically allowed the wives who were married to US citizens prior to 1924 to be able to come, because the Exclusion Act had basically shut the door and said nobody could come in. So they made that allowance for the citizens. So by 1933, the city's Chinese population was estimated at 400, and most of them had some involvement with the Chinese mission. Now you look at the number 400 and you say, but what about all those people that came here to work? Well, they came here to work and their families came as well, some of them who had families, but after the work was over, they moved on to other places, to seek work. So the number had dropped back down to 400. The Chinese mission became a place where young people could get acquainted. More marriages were taking place between California-born Chinese Americans. And by now, the Chinese men who were arriving in California were planning to stay. They, were no longer just gonna get an education or earn some money and then head home. So you can see in the picture on the right that, family and children started to increase a lot. Next slide. Now, in 1933, Robert Lee started Mandarin language class at the mission. Next slide. And although most of the members of the congregation were Cantonese speakers, they still welcomed Reverend Lee's Mandarin class because having class was better than not having class. They were also worried about their children, American-born children, losing their cultural and heritage and their language appreciation. So prior to joining the mission school, Reverend Robert Lee was secretary of the YMCA in Shanghai. And when he came, he served as a part-time pastor and also was attending San Diego State College. The reason why that so many of them seem to be coming here and doing a part-time thing is that, the mission couldn't afford to pay people a whole lot of money. So they had to get people who were qualified and who could also be willing to make the trek to San Diego because they also had, the priority of attending college here. So because he only spoke Mandarin in Shanghai, he did what he could do best. He started the Mandarin class, but he was only here for a short period of time. And after receiving his degree, he went back to Shanghai and resumed his job as the secretary of the YMCA. And then, just like before, the Chinese schools would start up, and then when the minister left, it would go dark again. In this case, the Chinese mission would go without Chinese language instruction again from 1934 to 1936. Next slide. So in 1937, Reverend Tin Wong would partner with the CCBA to form the first Chinese language school in San Diego. So that's a very critical marker point on our timeline there is 1937. Next slide. When Reverend KT Wong and his wife came to the Congregational Chinese Mission with experience of teaching Chinese language in Tucson and San Francisco. So they were very confident. They knew how to put a program together, and they felt they could really put together a substantial Chinese school here at the mission. But at the same time, the church could not finance the whole thing. So he wrote to the directors of the Chinese Benevolent Association to seek financial support. And when he got an enthusiastic response, he proceeded to form the Chunghua School, which is the first official Chinese school in San Diego. In March of 1937, Reverend Wong started the school with 20 students, which was great. And it also made the Chinese parents very happy, because it addressed their concerns about keeping their children connected with their language and culture. The classes were held on the ground floor of the CCA building at 426 3rd Street in the heart of Chinatown. Now, one of the interesting things about Reverend Wong was that when he and his wife joined the church, they actually were living in the dormitory, as a free place to live. And the Congregational Conference of Southern California only contributed $360 a year towards the salary. And so the CCBA paid him $500 a year for teaching the Chinese school 6 days a week. And he also taught at the Adult Education Extension Program at San Diego Unified School District, and he was also the church janitor. So he was a hardworking guy, and he was very committed to the welfare and well-being of the upcoming generation of Chinese. He often spoke at the youth conferences, the national youth conferences for Chinese youth. Next slide. So the Chunghua School started in 1937. We have a group photo in front of the building, and the Chunghua School, when it formally opened, in August, it was formed in March, but it formally opened in August of 37 with an enrollment of 60, including one European American student, and by the following year, it had increased to 80. Now, this wasn't just a Chinese class anymore. This was a school, because they had a principal, they had a vice principal, they had a board of directors, they had a chairperson from both the church as well as the CCBA, and Kai-Ten Wong and his wife Edith, along with 2 other qualified teachers, did all the teaching. And since the Chinese in San Diego were predominantly from southern China, the Guangdong province, that the school taught Cantonese primarily, but for advanced students, they would begin to offer some Mandarin. Next slide. And it was also not just an introductory program to learn, some basic words. They actually had a cohesive program. They taught translation, they taught writing, they taught composition, which is leading into journalism. They taught history, they taught geography. KT Wong would teach the older kids up to age 20, and his wife taught the younger ones, which were a minimum age of 7 years old. And they basically had a blackboard in the middle of the downstairs area, and they just split the class and made it work. Classes met 2 hours a day, 5 p.m. on weekdays, and also 10 a.m. on Saturdays. So it was also a 6 day a week program, but a very comprehensive program. Now, one of the amazing things about this school was not only was it really well organized, but it was also financed 100% by Chinese businesses and individuals through the CCBA. So that meant 0 tuition. Next slide. The Chunghua School was a big success, and it went on for almost 10 years, just shy of 10 years. And over that time, there was a lot of editorial coverage, and this just happens to be one of them. Headline is, "It's China in America," right here in San Diego. And that's KT Wong teaching geography to some of the students. And the school was the first Chinese school in San Diego, but it also inspired and motivated an entire generation, because it continued in operation for 9 straight years, and it empowered them with the understanding of their language and culture and heritage. The upper photo, the students in there are Alan Quinn, Jimmy Hom, Marble Lowe, and Rose Hom. So next slide. The spirit was really high there, okay? It was a really well thought out program. And principal, Tom Soon Kui, actually wrote a school anthem, which reflected the high spirit there. And it promoted the beauty of the country land as well as the merits of the school. And the words basically go, I love beautiful China, a glorious and heavenly country. Of 5,000 years of ancient history, our culture grows like a long rainbow. The foundation of people lies in children. Let us study the language. Let us brighten the light of our culture. Chunghua School has a great system. We are taught patiently in different subjects. All our young people should work hard to strengthen our body and our mind, learning by our teachers step by step. Let's grow both in morality and knowledge. Let us brighten the light of our culture. Next slide. So after the December 7th, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, all the men in the able-bodied men in the United States were required to take a physical and serve in the military to defend the country. Everyone between 18 and 64 had to participate in that campaign. And some of the Chinese schools students volunteered to join the Army Air Corps together. And we see some of them, Norman Leong, Jennings Hom, Jimmy Hom, Carl Cooey, and his brother Earl Cooey. And by December 13th, 1943, President Franklin Roosevelt signed a law repealing the Chinese Exclusion Act, finally allowing an immigration quota of 105 Chinese a year, and also granted immigrants naturalization rights for the first time. And ironically, on September 13th, 1945, KT Wong was naturalized and became an American citizen. Next slide. And again, as we say, and we look back at that timeline, when KT Wong and his wife left the church in 1946, the Chung Wah school would close. And it was very sad because the school really touched the Chinese community. Next slide. And it wouldn't be until 1959 that the Chinese Community Church and the CCBA would revive the Chunghua school. Next slide. So last time the Chunghua school was held away from the mission. It was down in Chinatown at the CCBA building. But this time around, when it was revived, it was opened and it was held at the Chinese Community Church on First Avenue. Now, the Chinese mission, Congregational Mission, changed its name in 1950 to the Chinese Community Church. So technically, it was the Chinese Community Church that revived the Chunghua school. So at this time, to give you a picture of what was going on, by the 1950s, the size of the congregation was flourishing thanks to the War Brides Act of 1945. Besides church services and English and Chinese, and the Sunday school classes for children, the Chinese Community Church also sponsored Ladies Guild, Men's Club, Teenagers Club, picnics, youth outings, vacation Bible school during the summers, and the Christmas night program. So all of this, and then on top of that, in 1959, they revived the Chinese Chunghua school. And one of the gentlemen, Mr. Harry Tom, was the president and treasurer, and he went out and he actually recruited all the Chinese-born children in San Diego to attend the Chinese school. And that's the reason why so many of the kids at that time came from all over the city. The school was open to children from age 6 and up, and it was open Monday through Friday, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Students sang the Republic of China national anthem every day before class. Tuition now was no longer free, it was $12. And as I mentioned, students, they walked, they took the bus, they carpooled to get there. Their parents just made sure that they got there. It was an important thing to do. Next slide. So the classes for the older students were held in the sanctuary in the main building portion of the church. And the younger students were taught in separate classrooms in the dormitory building, basically the Sunday school classes. So here is a list of some of the students that attended back then. Stephen Tom, Richard Hom. Stephen Tom was actually Harry Tom's son. And Richard Hom, Betty Hom, Omar Hom, they were, their parents were partners in Pullman Cafeteria. Amy Lee, her father was a college professor at San Diego State. Sue Lowe and her brother down below, Ronnie Lowe, their parents ran a grocery store. Anna Tom's parents ran Kwang Chong Laundry. Jimmy Yi, Gregory Yi, I believe his father was in real estate. And Emma Hom, her family lived in the Bing King Tong building, dormitories in downtown or in Chinatown. Carolyn He's father was a Chinese herbalist, the best Chinese herbalist in San Diego. Judy Dare, Ronald Dare, Richard Dare, their family ran a restaurant in National City. Paul Jung, Carol Jung, Helen Jung ran a grocery store on 29th and Market. Jimmy Lee, Susie Lee, Jeannie Lee, those are my brothers and sisters. They were in the older group. Marie Suhu, parents ran a grocery store in Logan Heights on National Avenue. Evelyn Liu, Jimmy Liu, their parents also ran a grocery store in Logan Heights. Herbie Lowe's father ran a men's clothing store, the Toggery shop. George Joe and Nancy Joe, their parents, and George Joe, the father, was the owner of the famous George Joe's Chinese Village on 3rd and Market Street. Jerry Hom Jr. and Dexter Hom, their parents were partners in Chinaland Restaurant, which is out on Midway in Point Loma. Phantom Hom, Jasmine Hom, their parents ran a laundry in the city. Jean Wong, parents ran Frisco Cafe on 5th and Market. Shirley Wong, parents had a small laundry in downtown. Judy Park, I don't remember exactly what her parents did. Sandra Tom and Rando Tom, I don't know what their father did, but we all knew him as a Chinese magician because he would pull rabbits and doves out of hats at all the festive occasions. So anyway, on the younger students, David said, Devon Hom. David said, he's one of our commentators today. And Devon Hom, Jeffrey Hom, Connie Hom, they were children from the Wuchi Chang family. Ronnie Lowe is the son, is the younger brother of Sue Lowe. They ran a grocery store. David Dare, younger sibling of the Dares up above from National City. Let's see, my parents ran a laundry, Wong Li Laundry. Suhu's ran a grocery store. Gaiman Tom, parents ran Kwang Chong Laundry. Philip Liu's parents ran Liu's Market in Logan Heights. Teddy Hom and let's see, his father ran several retail businesses in the city. Let's see, Victor Hom, parents ran a laundry. Donna Young, parents ran a laundry and dry cleaning business. Sharon Wong, parents ran Frisco Cafe. And let's see, we have Jerry Yi, sibling of the above. Johnny and Benji, we just knew their first names. I think they were part Chinese, part Filipino. I never knew their last names. So anyway, that gives you an overview of who attended or who was attending at the time. So we'll go to the next slide. So that was 1959, okay? They had just done this wonderful thing and launched the Chung Wah School of San Diego, or relaunched it. But the Chung Wah School was on the move from 1960 to 1961 because at that time, a lot of the members of the congregation had moved out to the suburbs, and they were starting to be more and more. And so the church sold the building on First Avenue, and the Chinese school stayed in downtown, and it would be relocated several times throughout that period looking for a permanent home until it settled down at the CCBA again on 438 3rd Avenue. And we see on the left, that is the Chinese Community Church building on First Avenue. That was 1959. And then the next one to the right is 1960 when it moved to the First Congregational Church on 6th Avenue and A Street. And then it moved again to the First Baptist Church at 10th Avenue and E Street near the public library. And then it moved to the Chung Wah School in the CCA building. And there were 3 different teachers during that time period, in that short time span, probably about a year and a half to 2 years. It started out with principal and teacher Miss Liu, and then it became Robert Young and his wife Cynthia. And then when it came back to Chinatown, it was Mr. Lam, principal and teacher. Next slide. The Chunghua School, 1961. Unlike in the 1920s and 30s when the Chinese school classes were held on the ground floor, in 1961, the Chunghua school classes were held upstairs. So as I mentioned, the principal and teacher was Mr. Lam. He happened to be a foreign student attending Cal Western University in Point Loma. Classes were held Monday through Friday, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. with 20-minute recess in between. And students came from Point Loma, North Park, Hillcrest, El Cajon Boulevard, Logan Heights, National City, and the State College area. Next slide. This is a page out of the annual Chamber of Commerce New Year's promotion book, okay? This was given to me by Jeffrey Hom and the Wichi Chong family. And we see the class picture there. The principal and teacher was Yvonne Quinn. She was the newly arrived elementary school teacher from Hong Kong, and she happened to be the wife of, or the new wife of one of Ah Quinn's grandsons, Joseph Quinn, and they ran the produce business directly across the street from the CCA building, which is still there today. So if you're ever down in Chinatown, you can see those buildings facing each other. The Chinese school board included Harry Tom, Miss Harry Jer, Andrew Ham, and David G. And the previous, I guess, not year, but I guess the previous semester in 61, previous to when this picture was taken, the honor student was Marie Suhu, or I guess her Chinese name is Suhu Mo Heng. So anyway, go to the next slide. This is a closer shot. So those of you who are on this Zoom presentation who maybe attended Chinese school at that time, or knew somebody who went there, or had a sibling who went there, you might recognize someone in this picture. These were the school board are the people that I named in the middle. And I'll tell you real quickly who the people are in the shot, starting from left to right, from the top row down. It's Lori Ham, Connie Ham, Devin Ham from Wichi Chong, Mary Ham, and Anna Tom and Betty Ham, Mary and Betty from Chinaland, Anna Tom from Kong Chong Laundry, and Anna Wong from Nanking Cafe, Jerry Woon from Sun Li Laundry, Omar Ham from Pullman Cafeteria, Carolyn He, the herbalist daughter, and then Jean Wong, Frisco Cafe, Marie Suhu from grocery store in Logan Heights, my brothers and sisters, and then there's Jack Woon, Sharon Wong, Jerry Hum Jr. from Chinaland, Alan Wong from Nanking Cafe. There's me, and there's Henry Suhu again, Jeffrey Hom. Next to Jeffrey Hom, we don't know who that boy is. We passed this picture around to so many people, and nobody could really recognize him. To the right of him is Teddy Hom, David Said, and Gaiman Tom. Next slide. This on the left is one of the elementary or entry level Chinese school books that we all used, or at least the younger kids started out with. And it was one of those books that had one picture, one word, one picture, one word. And I would say there were probably maybe 12 to 15 words in the whole book. Okay. And I would bet dimes to dollars that every one of us, because we memorized it, still know those words today. So anyway, the students shared one large room upstairs at the CCBA, just like they did in the old days downstairs. There's a blackboard dividing in the middle. The younger children, supposedly age 7 to 10, at least the younger kids anyway, sat at little single wooden desks in the front part of the room between the blackboard and the balcony out front. And the older students sat at a huge wood conference room table in the back. And Yvonne Quinn, Miss Quinn, would alternate teaching on both sides of the blackboard. She would teach, she'd give us an exercise, hop to the other side, and then she would do the same and do the same for 2 hours each evening. The students also, in addition to the everyday class lessons, we would also practice songs and sometimes some dances for group performances at the cultural events, holidays, and festivities throughout the year, including the Lunar New Year, the Double 10 National Day Festival, Hall of China International Festivals, which I think there were maybe 2 or 3 during the year. So it kept us busy, you know. So it was a fun program, and you know, and they had the final exams, and they awarded them some school supplies type awards at the time. I never won one, so I just saw other people unwrap them. Next slide. This is a school class picture from 1963. This was also from the annual Chamber of Commerce Lunar New Year promotion book. Principal this time had changed. Principal and teacher had changed to Wilfred Lee, who was a graduate student at San Diego State College, and his younger sister, who was an undergraduate student there, also teamed up with him to teach all of us kids. And the board of directors, again, Harry Tom as president and treasurer, Andrew Hom was still on there. And this time my father was on there, Ernest Lee. And I guess they divided the classifications for the awards into different age groups. So this time in 62, it was Constance Hom, Laurie Hom, Devin Hom, smart family that probably studied together, Susie Lee, Jean Lee, both my sisters, Jerry Woon, Anna Tom, and Betty Hom. So that's the Chinese school of 63. I'll show you a close-up shot on the next slide. Now, if you look closely at this picture, okay, you'll notice that a lot of the kids are a little bit, or the students are a little bit older. The smallest ones are also a little bit older. That tells you something. That tells you that there aren't as many younger kids starting, and the older kids, like my older brother who's in the middle with the glasses, Jim, he was in the 9th grade at that time. So almost everybody in the middle row, I would put it this way, 50% of the people in this picture were in junior high school at the time. And that was usually the transition point where homework started getting heavier in American school, and people would drop out, okay? So this is 1963. Probably by late 63, at least a third of the student body was not going to be there anymore. So enrollment was dropping like crazy. The students here, Devin Hom, Guyman Tom, Dexter Hom, me, David Seid, Jeffrey Hom, Jeannie and Susie, my sisters, Anna Tom, Betty Hom, my brother Jimmy, Jerry Hom Jr., Mary Hom, Jerry Hom, Jack Moon Omar, Teddy, Connie, Lori, and Sylvia Hom. Sylvia is Teddy's younger sister. But we'll go to the next slide. This slide is a newspaper clipping from the San Diego Union Evening Tribune. And it was taken at the Hall of China and at one of the events where the school performed. And the newspaper clipping shows Devin Hom, Jeffrey Hom, Gaiman Tom, Connie Hom, myself, and then one of the Lucky Lion dancers, Jack Chan. They were celebrating the October 10th, 1911 overthrow of the Manchu dynasty, which was the beginning or the birth of the Chinese Republic. So a very important day. And that was one of very many articles that were, that were featured in the newspaper highlighting the Chunghua Chinese school. One last thing is that Wilfred, who was the teacher and principal at that time, just like Yvonne, would teach the older classes in the front of the, or I mean, towards the back of the blackboard, and his sister taught the younger kids in the front of the blackboard. Next slide. The Chunghua school, you saw all the kids, okay? I kind of put out some email questions probing to try and collect some thoughts in terms of recollections and what people remembered. And it was kind of interesting to see. Connie Hom said, "I'm impressed when I look back now how we all learned to use brush and ink, which are rarely taught in these days in Chinese classes." David said, his comment was, "I remember Harry Tom sold calligraphy supplies from the trunk of his car." Well, Harry Tom did that, but Harry Tom also recruited everybody. And he also, those who didn't have a ride that were between his house and Chinese school would pick them up, and he would bring them to Chinese school, and then he would drive them back home. I have to take my hat off to him. He did a lot. And Sylvia Hom said, "I was a little kid and not very studious. I remember a Chinese herb shop or apothecary next door." She's referring to Gim Wing, which was the staple goods store. "We used to go there after Chinese school to get ginger pieces for treats, and the ginger was really hot." I mean, that tells you how young some of these students were. In fact, Connie Hom would say that she actually started Chinese school when she was 4 years old. She said, "I was 4. I started going to Chinese school. I was 4 when I started going to Chinese school. And Yvonne Quinn became my teacher. She was very kind to us. I remember thinking she was very pretty in her Cheng Sam and that she smiled a lot." So, I mean, although the starting age was supposed to be 7, there were children, members of the family, that signed their kids up as young as 4. Lori Hom said, "Many of us came back from recess late, and Warford," who she means Wilfred, lined us up and smacked the knuckles of all of us. We were just following the older boys like John LeeWong and Gaiman Tom. So I guess I was influential there. Connie Hom also said, I always thought the CCBA silk costumes were a treat to wear." That was going to the events like the one that you saw on the previous news clipping. And I thought this quote was very insightful as well. And it's another quote from Connie Hom. She said, "I felt at a disadvantage because other kids spoke Chinese at home all the time, and our parents spoke to us in English." Okay. And, we didn't know who spoke Chinese at home and not. All we knew is that we were all there. So I imagine it had to be tougher to be walking in there and trying to, absorb all of this without any, or as much language being spoken at home. So anyway, on the left is a Japji book, which is a traditional brush workbook, which we all had in Chinese school. Next slide. So between 1959 and 1963, that included the beginning of the Chunghua school, the revival of it in 1959 at the mission. through the First Congregational Church, the First Baptist Church, back to CCBA. These children here, or students, probably account for, I would say, 90% of the students that went there that during that period. So they started at a younger age, stuck to it until probably middle or late junior high school. But that's probably most of the kids that attended there. Next slide. So just as I pointed out to you in the second class photo, where there was noticeably fewer kids and the kids who were there were noticeably a little bit older, is that the enrollment was shrinking. So due to this shrinking enrollment in 1963, the Chunghua school in Chinatown was closed and relocated to the Chinese Community Church on 47th Street, out towards the suburbs where there were a lot more young families starting. And so they would get an influx of, kids that were, just starting elementary school, to join the program and stick with it. So it was a critical transition point in the history of Chinese schools, and the beginning and end of the first Chinese school in Chinatown. So we're gonna stop and see if there are any questions at this point that we can kind of, field. Might be able to take a few.
Okay, so I've been reviewing the chat box. There's been a fair amount of activity in the chat box, more comments than questions. So for example, we're joined today by Andrea Chan, whose grandmother is Minnie Quinn. Also by Mary Del Chu, whose father is Professor Emeritus of History from SDSU, Pao Chin Chu. There's also a person named Cao Hui, I think, who would like to get in contact with you, John. I will share their email with you afterwards. You used to play with them when you were 7 or 8.
Okay.
There are a couple of people who have made comments about feeling concerned about anti-Chinese sentiment today. Mary Del Chu, Ivy Maldonado, and Paula Carmack. Okay. Finally, the last set of comments. So Dr. Coker, who teaches at SDSU, he mentions that this is a very fascinating subject and topic, that it's documentary worthy. There are also a couple of comments that are just, people feel really, I don't know if the word is proud. People want to commend you on the work, the research and the work that you've done. There have been multiple comments about how you're doing a great job with the presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go on, please.
Okay,
thank you.
Let's move ahead to the next slide. Okay, so that was when the Chunghua school, Chunghua, by the way, was spelled C-H-U-N-G, and it's W-A-H, as in this slide here, okay? In the next, later on, the spelling will change with a new name to the school. So, but anyway, when the Chunghua school left Chinatown, okay, and was relocated at the Chinese Community Church, it was also a time when Reverend Zhao was leaving the church, and Reverend Joseph Ma from San Francisco would join the church, okay? And Reverend Ma came from San Francisco. He was born in Guangdong, China, and he also studied theology at the Lingnam University there, the major university in Guangdong. And he had a wonderful grasp of the Chinese language, and he really prided himself in that. So when he joined the church and there was an opportunity to be able to carry the torch of Chinese school in San Diego, he embraced it and continued the Chunghua school from 1964 to 1969. Next slide. So in February of 1964, with the continued financial support of CCBA, even though it was no longer being held in the building, Reverend Ma and his wife, Virginia, began teaching Chinese school at the church. But however, classes at the church would be cut back to only 1 day a week. It was on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. for children to learn Cantonese. And by 1966, the enrollment had worked itself back up to 34. My guess is that it was a lot more younger kids coming in, another generation of kids. I know personally that my younger brother, June and Willie, both started Chinese school at the end of 63 in Chinatown, and then it closed. And then my father would drive them to the church on Saturdays because it was 1 day a week. It was doable. He couldn't do it if it was every day, but they did go there for about a year or a year and a half, starting in 1964. So again, the classes the program was reduced to a 1 day a week versus the 5 day a week. And Reverend Ma also taught adult conversation classes only, conversation only for adults on Tuesday nights, 7:30 to 9 p.m. But, those 5 years, 64 to 69, went pretty fast. So in 69, before leaving for a new pastorship at the First Methodist Church in Los Angeles, Chinatown, Reverend Ma asked Dr. Irene Chang to consider starting a Chinese school program at the church because it was very important, okay? So the picture on the bottom right is a picture of the Chinese Community Church. It was built in beautiful stucco bricks and redwood at the time. At the time, it was considered very modern and contemporary. So this picture came from the Chinese Community Church Centennial book cover. So next slide. So in 1970, Dr. Irene Chang thought about what Reverend Ma had told her, and she stepped forward and founded the Chunghua HWA School of San Diego Incorporated at the Chinese Community Church. Next slide. So we see her there on the left, and she is a one of the best trained educators that you'll ever find for any kind of school, whether it be Chinese or English, American schools, okay? And we'll get into that. But Dr. Irene Chang served as a school's administrator while she was a full-time professor at the University of California, San Diego. So in 1970, she revitalized and expanded the church's language school to include both Cantonese and Mandarin instruction. And she was able to do that only because she had the help of 3 principal teachers, Miss Kitty Tao, Miss Ming S. Lin, Chun Si Lin, and a handful of other, qualified language assistants. So because Dr. Irene Chang, did not actually teach there, okay? So she had to have a great, a great staff to carry on the actual day-to-day. In 1971, what she did was she registered the school with the Department of Education in San Diego at Chung Wah School, as Chung Wah School of San Diego Incorporated, and it was incorporated as a nonprofit organization separate from the church, largely for tax reasons, to make the money go further, even though the classes would be conducted at the church. The school began with 43 students in 1970 and flourished to 93 students in 1977. And in the mid-1980s, the school, Chunghua School, offered Mandarin and Cantonese classes for beginning, intermediate, and advanced students. So it was, a lot more comprehensive than the school that I went to. Next slide. Now, some people would ask, who is Dr. Irene Chang? Okay, Dr. Irene Chang was born in Hong Kong in 1904 to a Eurasian tycoon, Swedish tycoon, Sir Robert Ho Tung, and his wife, Lady Clara Ho Tung. Sir Robert Ho Tung was actually knighted twice by the Queen of England. So we're talking about a very well respected family. She received a BA in Hong Kong in 1925, an MA from Columbia in 1929, and her PhD from London University in 1936. And then Dr. Chung became professor at Lingnan University in Guangzhou and a staff member of the Ministry of Education in Nanjing before returning to Hong Kong, where she became the first senior education officer in 1948. And she was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in 1961. So she had incredible experience in terms of understanding teaching and how to really make it count. She spent many years as a lecturer on the Chinese cultural life, as a lecturer on Chinese cultural life at the University of California, San Diego, and also in community colleges, elementary schools, secondary schools, and was a speaker for many service clubs in San Diego prior to founding, and also during, her tenure at Chunghua School of San Diego. Next slide. Oh, I'm gonna just jump back and throw in one more factoid that someone shared with me the other day. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Stanley Ho family in Hong Kong. Stanley Ho was a gentleman who actually created Macau as the casino capital of Asia. And so they are related to the family as well. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. So Dr. Chung set up the school to cultivate a child's complete personality by teaching Chinese and culture, okay? That comes from her long experience of many years of teaching, going to school, some of the finest schools, as well as teaching and running schools of all different levels in China. So her curriculum included conversation, calligraphy, reading, history, geography, music, art, and drama. There were 7 different levels, class levels, 3 in Mandarin, 3 in Cantonese, and 1 oral Mandarin for adults. Students only met on Tuesdays, again, 1 day a week, 4 to 6, and then, 2 days a week, 1 day a week on Tuesdays and on weekdays, and then also Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So it went from 5 days a week in Chinatown and the Chinese Community Church in Chinatown to 1 day a week with Reverend Ma, back to 2 days a week here with Dr. Irene Chang. And the adults, they also had an adult class on Saturdays. Now, interesting thing is that the school program also went from being tuition free when it was founded in 1937. And then it went to $12 a month when I was going. And now with the new program here at the Chung Wah School of San Diego Incorporated, it's $45 a month. But that's $45 tuition for a 3-month period. So it went from $12 to $15, okay? So $45 tuition per 3-month period. And I assumed that the school went all year round. I didn't attend here, so I don't know if they took summer break or not. But anyway, regardless, the $45 for the 3-month term was nowhere near the cost of the actual cost of running the school. So Dr. Chung, with her passion and her commitment, took it upon herself to seek support from family and friends in Hong Kong to keep the school going from 1970 to 1993, 23 years. So on the left, we have a photo from the 4th anniversary of the Chung Wah Chinese School in San Diego. We can see in the middle, I don't know if you can see him, there's a gentleman with the glasses. His name is Victor O. Chan. And so he was the principal at that time in 1974. And the middle photo is a picture of Dr. Irene Chang teaching sentence construction to Denise Su at the church. And to the right is Chak Ho and Lai Ki, the two little boys with their Cantonese instructor, Donna Lee. Okay, and that was also 1974. These pictures were all, made available through a book that David Seid shared with me, and it was the 10th anniversary celebration booklet for the Chinese school of the Chunghua School of San Diego, Chunghua, Chunghwa, Chunghua School of San Diego Incorporated. Next slide. So just like the Chunghua School in Chinatown, the Chunghua School of San Diego at the church also had their school song. But there's a noticeable difference here. The one previously sang about the beauty of the homeland, but it also did a lot of sell on the merits of the school and the quality of the school. This song, largely because of Dr. Irene Chang, is purely about the passion, passion for the homeland, the beauty and everything that we should remember and appreciate. So this song, I was going to take a break. Does anyone who went to the Chunghua School of San Diego know this song that might be on the Zoom call, that might want to sing it for us?
Feel free to unmute yourselves.
Okay, I will just take you through the lyrics then. Okay, so the lyrics go, riding on the long winds, flying higher and higher, we reach the top of Kunlun Mountains. We turn our heads and see in the east the Great Wall crawling along like a dragon. The 5 famous mountains standing like screens. Huang Ho is yellow. Yanxi Kiang is long. The Pearl River is rich and fertile. Such great, good rivers and mountains, beautiful and majestic, are our land, our native land. So it was just really, passing on the celebration of the homeland with this song. Next slide. So in 1984, Sally Wong, who was a very well-respected member of the Chinese community, was named principal of the Chunghua School of San Diego. On the left, we have a little clipping. It's the announcement of her appointment to being principal. So who is Sally Wong? Sally Wong was ideal for the position because she always had a passion for Chinese language. She was born in Hong Kong, grew up in North Borneo, earned her college and law degree in the United States, and was fluent in Mandarin, Cantonese, Hakka, and English. She was also very well respected in the community. And she was the director of the Chinese Social Center. And she was also a mother of a young daughter. And we'll find out that Sally will play a very important role in the development of the Chinese school in San Diego. Next slide. The Chunghua School was, as I mentioned, according to Dr. Irene Chang, it was about teaching the language. It was about teaching the culture. Her curriculum included that in both Mandarin and Cantonese, but it was also important to include the culture part, which was music, drama, dance. So here we see some photos of some of that program there. The Chunghua Chinese School of San Diego did a lot more than that. they raised awareness of the local Chinese community by producing a television program, International Hour, for Channel 8 TV in San Diego. I believe it was a series where they covered Chinese culture, and they also throughout the year staged lion dances, and they would lend Chinese artifacts to different companies that would be of interest, and one of them was the Broadway department store in Fashion Valley. The school also provided information on Chinese culture for stage productions when they were asked, whether they were Chinese productions or just other movie productions. They would also do it for the programs, the stage programs that went along with the Chinese Chinatown beauty pageant during the Lunar New Year. And from 1970 to 1993, the Chung Wah Chinese School of San Diego was the premier Chinese school, and it would change the lives of many of the American-born children, probably 2 generations. But going back to these pictures on the left, okay, we see Arlene Tui standing on the left, okay, and seated on the bottom left is Artie Ham, and the other 2 girls, ribbon dancers, are the siblings of Arlene Tui, and their names are Gloria and Denise Tui. So from what I've read, is that their ribbon dance was, was incredible to watch. To the right, we see a lion dance, and the gentleman in there is named Matt Tom. And the group of singers at the top, we were not able to, track down the names of them, but they were part of the drama, art, and performance program at the school. These pictures were also from the Chinese Community Church Centennial Book, as well as the Chunghua School 10th Anniversary Book. Next slide. So at this time, or for a long time, the Chunghua School of San Diego was the premier school, Chinese school in San Diego, okay, being held at the Chinese Community Church. But between 1979 and 1988, when there was an influx of more Chinese families coming to the United States, several other Chinese schools began to open between the North County and the South Bay, because, it was probably too far for them to come to one location. And on the other hand, the Chunghua School of San Diego at the church was probably not big enough to accommodate a whole lot more than what they were doing. So they had their plates pretty full. Next slide. So that being said, in 1993, okay, Dr. Irene Chang gave it some very careful consideration. Her passion says keep going, but her body is telling her, maybe it's time to close the school. So in 1993, she closed the Chunghua School of San Diego because of not only diminishing funding, but also at that time, I believe she was 88 years old. And there were also some members of the school administration that were also getting up in age and were either thinking about retiring or had already started retiring. So timing wise, 1993 seemed like it was, the time to have to say goodbye. Next slide. But as I introduced to you earlier, Sally Wong, the principal at the school, and Sally Wong would reopen the school later that year, but under a different name. It went from the Chunghua School of San Diego to the Chinese School of San Diego. And she did it with her personal funding, okay? So she picked up the torch and carried on. Next slide. From 1993 to 2008, the Chinese School of San Diego grew by leaps and bounds under the leadership of Sally Wong, okay? Sally Wong's vision was to make the school, I'm sorry, Sally Wong's vision was to make the school's Chinese language and culture program not only available to American-born Chinese children, she also wanted to make it available to students of all ethnicities. So that was a big step. And then the second thing that she wanted to do was to make the Chinese School of San Diego the only fully accredited Chinese language program in the county. The Chinese School of San Diego was registered with the San Diego Unified School District and the Southern California Chinese Council of Schools, and it would become the only Chinese school to receive accreditation with the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. So between 1994 and 2008, the Chinese School of San Diego moved several times from the Chinese Community Church to Coleman College campus, back to the Chinese Community Church, to 2 different locations on Arrow Drive, and constantly looking for more space to expand. In 2008, Sally would finally move the Chinese School of San Diego to its current custom-built campus on Ruffin Road and launch their Chinese bilingual preschool. So between 1994 and 2008, the enrollment at the Chinese School of San Diego increased by 265% from 60 to 160 students. So we see on the left, Sally's husband, Dennis Avery, conducting the commencement ceremony during one of the years at Coleman College. On the right, we see Sally Wong when she was leading the commencement ceremony of the Chinese school when it was at Arrow Drive. And in between, we see a photograph of the student body when the Chinese school had to move back to the Chinese Community Church temporarily while they were trying to secure other suitable space. And that was in the year of 2003. So yeah, there was a lot of advancements made, not only by the Chinese School of San Diego, but for the whole meaning of what it takes to run a highfalutin Chinese school program with all of the certifications and reaching out to not just Chinese community, but anybody who had the passion and interest. Next slide. So in 2005, backtracking just half a step, part of what made this help make this all possible was in 2005, Sally's husband, Dennis Avery, had bought her a building on Ruffin Road. And that allowed her to create the ideal campus, which would be completed in 2008. It would allow her to create a program that would accommodate the ideal number of students, okay, where they could control the number of students so they could make sure that the quality of the program was at its best, both for preschool and kindergarten all the way through high school. Next slide. When I interviewed Sally Wong, who's when she got married, her name became Sally Wong Avery. Okay, so in interviewing Sally Wong Avery, about her involvement with the Chunghua School of San Diego at the church, and also, taking on the responsibility of carrying on, the Chung Wah school lineage. Okay. She talked about a number of things, but one interesting thing that she said was, and I think it's driven by by passion is, she said, my ultimate dream would be to offer instruction in all the major Chinese dialects, not just Mandarin and Cantonese. The realities are, I don't know if it's possible, but that's where her heart is at. So I thought that was interesting. So today, Chinese School of San Diego's program still includes both Mandarin and Cantonese language instruction from kindergarten through 12th grade, and their bilingual preschool, and foreign language credits that can be transferred to San Diego County school districts. It's accredited by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, and is open to passionate learners of any age and ethnicity. Okay. She also told me that they also do get people, you know, who are trying to learn Mandarin and Cantonese for their business as well, or for whether it's travel or whatnot, and they will also, you know, put together special programs to help them accommodate their needs. So Chinese School of San Diego's campus, as it was designed, has 14 indoor classrooms, a privately owned gallery of ancient Chinese art, so that their students can really appreciate, you know, seeing and being around this art collection. They also learn from the art collection the history of different periods of Chinese history. It also has a full commercial kitchen for student meal preparation, primarily for the preschool, but they also use it for cooking classes from time to time. The Chinese School of San Diego these days, during the last year, is fully compliant with the latest state COVID-19 safety guidelines. And you know, we can see the picture on the left. The top two rows is the Chinese School of San Diego, just a couple of shots to give you an idea of what it looks like on the inside. And these were pre-pandemic, so large groups, close proximity is not an issue. And down below, you can kind of see the Chinese flavor of the preschool. You can see a giant carved, that's an ivory ship. You can see the music instruments and things like that. So yeah, it was a custom tailored plan. Next slide. Since 1993, the Chinese School of San Diego has remained committed to giving the students of all ages and ethnicities in San Diego the best possible Chinese language and culture enrichment program. Their staff are all selected from candidates from Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan. The administrative team is constantly looking for the best learning materials from Asia, and they also think about and develop proprietary content for their curriculum. So, and that includes Chinese history, geography, literature, philosophy, Chinese customs, Chinese art, Chinese music, Chinese, Asian fashion, and also a cuisine. So the school also has streamlined its regular staff of 20 bilingual instructors. During the pandemic, they've narrowed it down to 10 prolific, virtual-minded Zoom instructors. And this is to help keep their students engaged with their studies. You know, some of them have been there, might be their first year, some might be in their third year, and so forth. So they just are doing this to keep them on track while they're not able to necessarily get together. Next slide. So what does the landscape of Chinese schools in San Diego look like today? Okay, when it started out, when we look back at the timeline, the Chinese schools anyway, started out, they were in English, okay, for 1870 all the way to 1925 was when the first Chinese class was set up. And that was with Reverend C.C. Hung. And then from there, it went to 1937, when KT Wong teamed up with CCBA and created the first Chinese school in San Diego, where it had its own funding and everything else. And then from there, when that was closed and revived in 1959, when the Chinese Community Church and the CCBA revived it, and it was held at the church. It moved around the city, back to CCBA, was shut down, went to the church. So at that time, there was still basically, for the most part, at any given time, one, okay? Not until, as I had mentioned, into, I would say it was 1979 to 1988, that there started to be a few more opening up because of influx of new families coming from not just Southern China, but they were coming from Taiwan, Malaysia, they were coming from Singapore, they're coming from different parts of China where Mandarin was a little bit more of the language spoken at home. So we get to today, the landscape, and although at one time, Chung Wah School, WAH, and Chunghua School of San Diego, HWA, were the only Chinese schools in the city. But today there are more than 20 independent Mandarin Cantonese culture schools throughout San Diego, North County, and South Bay. And the number within that number continuing to grow, okay? The schools include a half a dozen well-established independent Chinese language culture schools. Excuse me, I get this phone. Hang on one second. Sorry. Okay. So as I was mentioning, the number of schools is still growing. The schools include the half a dozen well-established independent Chinese language culture schools, which include either a preschool or a kindergarten program and extend through high school with fully accredited curriculum. But in addition to that, there are also Chinese schools that are preschool only, elementary school only, after school and weekday only. And there are Mandarin programs, or I'm sorry, language programs now that are also offering multiple languages, which are Mandarin and English, Mandarin and Spanish, Mandarin and Spanish and French, Mandarin, Spanish and Hindi. So that gives you the landscape of what is evolving out there today. Next slide. So among all the growing number of Chinese language schools in San Diego, Chinese School of San Diego is the only one that offers both Mandarin and Cantonese instruction today. Okay, I think it's, a lot of them only offer Mandarin because that's where the direction that things may be going, but Sally is committed to, offering both. So next slide. So not only is Chinese School of San Diego the only school that offers both Mandarin and Cantonese today, but they're also continuing to lead the way with its over 100 years of Chinese school history. And that history goes all the way back to 1885 with the Chinese mission school. So next slide. This is a glimpse of the resources that helped me retrace the history of Chinese schools in San Diego. I know I mentioned some of the names, but this gives you a visual as to what they are, what they look like. Number one is the 10th anniversary book and a whole collection of Chung Wah School of San Diego newsletters that David Seid had, shared with me. That was, really wonderful in terms of being able to capture the history of that part of the history timeline. Number 2 is a book that I received from Henry Suhu and his family, and it's the Chinese Community Church centennial issue, which talks about the 100 years of the Chinese Community Church, and it also had a lot of wonderful information about Chinese school during that period, but also how it played in terms of the total church program. Number 3 is the cover of In Search of Gold Mountain by Murray Lee. That was referred to me by Sally Wong Avery. It's a great book on the history, the Chinese history of San Diego. Can't say enough about Carl Fung's book, The Dragon Pilgrims. And that's a small paperback book, but the information in it is incredible in terms of not only the Chinese church, the history of the Chinese church, but also the history of Chinese school and the importance of Chinese school instruction, as well as how it changed generations of Chinese kids. Number 6 is an interesting book. It's Gospel Pioneering, and that is a book that was written by William C. Pond, and it talks about the congregationalism in California, and covers a lot on the Chinese congregationalism in California. As I mentioned, that he had actually started 49 Chinese missions during his period. Number 10 is one of many editorial pages covering the history of Chinese schools. That one was provided to me by David Seid as well. And then there's some online resources, lots of it. The San Diego History Center, which has numerous volumes about different kinds of history, and a lot on the San Diego Chinese community history, and also the San Diego Chinese Historical Society and Museum, as well as newspaper articles and editorial from the San Diego Union Tribune, the San Diego Reader, and also the South China Morning Post. So yeah, again, I'd like to, say thanks to all the people that helped me retrace the history. I think I learned a lot, I think that, as I said earlier, that my tenure or period involvement in Chinese school was 6 years, 6 days a week, between, I would say it was like I think I stopped going in 1963. So it was probably 1959 to 63. So thereabouts. So anyway, it's incredible, the time span. And I know that many of you out in the audience today lived a different part of it, okay? And you definitely know that in detail more than I was able to experience through my research. So at this point, what I'd like to do is turn to opening up questions or